The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Smith coming to you live from New Orleans, the mystical land of voodoo, where spirits walk among us. I'm going to explore today the medium's role in paranormal investigations. Then later at the top of the hour, we're going to explore the advice column, weekly advice to budding mediums, what to do, what not to do. But first, let's say hello to my co-host coming to you live from Cornwall, the UK. That's England to the rest of us Americans because we don't know any better. He's the inventor of television psychics, Billy Roberts. Welcome, Billy.
Hi, Kalila. Nice to see you again, or meet you again, rather.
Yes. We've met from time to time, sometimes in person, sometimes on the phone, and Now we're doing it this way. And it's wonderful to have you here. Billy was such a wonderful guest on the first show that we decided to continue to do this show together.
Yeah.
And we just have such a wonderful working chemistry here. And Billy has just such a fascinating history. Today, he's going to talk about some different things. What are you going to discuss with us today, Billy?
I think to look at mediumship, the implications of mediumship, the mechanics of mediumship, and also the psychological implications of developing mediumistic skills. I think it's an interest to a lot of people in the paranormal field.
Yes, and in the mediumship world as well. I mean, we live in a time now where everybody is becoming a medium. They're cranking them out like cookie cutters, really, as with anything else. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's always good to develop yourself. But there is a lot of confusion on what a medium is, what a medium is not, and what are those roles and responsibilities with mediumship, because along with anything, you do have responsibilities. So I did run across something, though, interesting, Billy, on an investigation a few months ago, and I start to see this more and more, and not even on just investigations. I mean, I see people just in everyday life. They suddenly believe that they're mediums, and they are talking to spirits, and they're trying to send them through the light. I was at an investigation that was a public investigation we were doing, and a young lady with a paranormal group said, I saw a little girl, and I sent her through the light. And in my mind, I said, why? Why would you need to do that for a child? And I said nothing. I just smiled, but I thought that was rather odd. What is your take on these people having to send people through the light? What is your take on this?
I've always been very skeptical and cynical about these kind of people who run these groups and say things like sending a deceased person into the light. People have been dying since time immemorial, and the process of death is quite natural without mediumistic intervention. So sometimes I find it quite offensive when I look at these, because I've been guests on a lot of groups, and I've listened to these budding mediums who come out with a load of nonsense. It can send out a wrong signal to people who are serious about the paranormal and mediumistic development. And it is offensive. And in some ways, it's quite hurtful to a lot of people. It's a load of nonsense, in other words, I think, anyway.
Well, I agree, and this is not to offend anyone out there who is working on this, because unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of education about this, and many of the new groups. I mean, Billy and I have been doing this for a while, a few decades, and it seems like the newer groups, the more up and coming groups, are actually getting their education off of the television shows that are out there, and people have to understand that they're seeing, number one, something that's been edited. They're not seeing the entire investigation. And they're also only seeing a lot of what's on the scientific end, working with the equipment and so forth. They're not really seeing trained mediums. So I think there's a lot of lack of education on the subject. Don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I think you're right in saying that, these television programs are to blame in some way. They create their own demons, without mentioning any particular names. But people tend to see certain mediums on the television and they think that's it, that's the way it should be done. And, I've always said that mediums are born, they're not made. And mediumship itself is experimental. It doesn't always work, for many different reasons. And you can be an environmental medium, which means you're very sensitive to the supersensual environment. So you can go into an old building and sense the presence of certain individuals, but they're not necessarily spirits. It's like a photographic image. In science, it's called a stone tape theory. So the theory is that all images, every experience, emotional experience that's transpired in the building is impregnated into the very fabric of the building. And anybody who's sensitive can actually sense this environment. It's like looking at a video replay of an image. These images have no consciousness, no awareness of you. It's only when you encounter a spirit that is aware of your presence, as you're aware of its presence, then you've got a true disembodied soul. So it's an emotional minefield, to be honest. And I've become very skeptical in my old age. I mean, I've been mediumistically inclined since I was a kid. So growing up with this, seeing so-called dead people was always commonplace to me. I didn't see, I thought everybody was the same as me. But later on in my life, I realized that not everybody is the same. And some people have a propensity towards developing mediumistic skills, and others only want to be a medium. And wanting to be a medium does not mean that you are a medium. A lot of work is involved. And paranormal groups, I mean, in the UK, there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and you see them on Facebook. And these groups are run by people who are often, very, very often, not qualified to run groups, because they have a responsibility to the people who attend these meetings. So I am very skeptical. And we've had discussions about this before. And I think a lot of work has to be done to change things, certainly in the UK.
Oh, here as well. Yes, definitely. And what happens is with a lot of these groups is that the ego comes in. You have a lot of ego there. You have a lot of people that are trying to be television stars. They're not real interested necessarily in what they're doing. That passion isn't there. They're kind of playing the role because they're kind of auditioning in hopes of getting a television show, and that's great. But sometimes people are attracted to that, and they think they're learning proper ways to communicate with the other side, and when in fact they really aren't, and they're losing a lot of the essence of what mediums are. So you get a lot of people that are walking around talking to the dead per se, or they're talking to something. And I see that a lot of times, like on cemetery tours. People will say, I talked to this person here. This is where a little girl is buried, and I talk to her all the time, and she communicates back with me. And I always laugh and say, well, you're talking to something. You're certainly talking to something, but I don't think you're talking to that little girl. That little girl passed on 200 years ago. She's moved on. She's gone to another realm, or she's reincarnated, or whatever she did. But you're not speaking to that little girl. That little girl doesn't live in the headstone. But you are talking to something that is letting you think that it is that little girl. If you think it's that little girl, then it's going to present itself as that little girl. And a lot of people don't understand that, but I think with myself, it comes from 30 years of working in traditional African religions and understanding that other side. And that's what's lacking in a lot of the up and coming mediums, is that they don't have the spiritual background and the studying of the spiritual realm to really, before they even step into that arena of communicating with it, and they really don't know what they're dealing with.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. It's the same in the UK, and I've worked in different parts of the States, America, New York particularly. And mediumship tends to be completely different in America. They have different styles, different ways of working. But here, I've made a detailed analysis of mediumship, and a medium who is not genuine can't travel, because, for an example, in the UK we have different areas. Obviously, Liverpool names of people. If a Liverpool medium travels from Liverpool to, say, London or Cornwall, the names are different. So if they're just making names up and giving names out to an audience, they'll find that they're in for a surprise, because the names in Cornwall, as you found out yourself, but you are brilliant, and people still talk about you with some reverence, asking when you're coming back. But the names don't. Genuine mediums can travel anywhere, work anywhere in the world, and that's how you tell a genuine medium. Telling somebody they've had a difficult week, or you might have been divorced, and all the psychological things about a person's life does not constitute mediumship. That's something completely different.
If you are doing that, that could be, qualify as psychic. You are reading the auric field and picking up what's going on in the person's auric field, which, can either be, you're picking it up psychically, or you're just picking up on thought forms from that person. That person's projecting that. I'm hoping that this comes up. And then, of course, you pick up on that projection, because even thought forms have energy. And all of these things, they're like radio waves. So our brains can still pick them up. And that's what makes it so difficult. That's the tricky part, is to know when you are actually doing mediumship and when you're not. And I think that's what Billy's going to talk about today. Yeah. But we're going to take a little commercial break right now. So we'll be right back.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, and it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about, the Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
And we're back. All right. So, Billy, tell us a little bit about, some of the topics you're going to talk about today, because first, I think before we do anything, it's good for people to know, maybe you could explain what an actual medium is. What is mediumship and how does it work?
Well, to me, mediumship is abnormal. It's not something that's given to everybody. And in 1903, a neuroscientist in Russia, in Moscow University, by the name of Ivan Tutinsky, became very fascinated with children's experiences, the way a lot of children could sense things and see so-called dead people. So he devoted 7 years of his work. He compromised his professional position in Moscow University, studying the neurological changes in the brain of people with mediumistic tendencies. And he found that the brains of mediums were different. He found that the pineal gland, which is a walnut-shaped gland deep in the brain, was larger in a child than it is in an adult, and more developed in a female than it is in a male. So we concluded that children were very sensitive. Sometimes the pineal gland would shrink as they get older, and often it didn't, which meant they